Let's get going. Hey, everybody, we're going to get started here in just a second. We are so excited to have you join us, and we're looking forward to having you in Baltimore. We may have a few more people join us, but I want to be very appreciative of your time as we move forward. So Becca's going to bring up the slides. We're going to give you a little background on what is going to be baking and shaken in Baltimore on March 27th through the 29th. Let me just say I'm Ruth Ann Norton. I'm the president and CEO of the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative. Really honored both to work at GHHI and to be a part of such a wonderful steering committee that is putting on our equity, environmental justice, and climate meeting that we're calling Mobilizing for Green and Healthy Homes, March 27th through the 29th here in Charm City. We want to thank ACEEE. You'll hear from Mark today, the Building Decarbonization Coalition, RMI, Emerald Cities, Elevate. You'll hear from Ann McKibben. We Act. You'll hear from Dana Johnson, and Kinetic Communities represented today by Claudia and the entire team there. So if you we're super excited. If there's any questions you have afterwards on logistics, on your hotel, on your travel, let Becca Jackson know. She'll put her email in the chat. And what we wanted to do was to provide this webinar to basically cover some basics around building decarbonization, electrification, that'll inform the work so that the 28th and 29th, after we do the home site visits for some of the homes that we are doing in Baltimore and visiting with the families, that we'll be able to get to work together, come up with really good recommendations, build a network that can be electrified as a movement across the country, but grounded in very tangible and transformational actions. So let's get to it, and let me introduce today's presenters. I don't know, I think there's a slide for that, Becca, if you want to move to that slide. There you go. How about those beautiful people? If only, go back, please. One more, there you go. We've got Dana Johnson from We Act for Environmental Justice, and she'll be talking to you today about the benefits of building decarbonization. Dana is the Senior Director of Strategy and Federal Policy at We Act for Environmental Justice and leads an advocacy, regulatory, and policy setting team. I don't know if there's a more fierce team in the nation. She has successfully helped shape the environmental industry narrative in the areas of clean air, healthy homes, water quality, energy, democracy, and transportation standards. Dana's a board member of Green 2.0, a nonprofit organization that believes that voices and leadership of a powerful environmental movement must be as diverse as the causes as champions. I think that almost sums up the purpose of our meeting in Baltimore. So we might not need to say more, except for we're going to keep being fabulous here. We have Ann McKibben, my dear friend from Elevate, who's going to do some level setting with us, walking us through the retrofit 101. Ann is a principal director of policy at Elevate in Chicago, who works across the country. Elevate implements programs that help people gain access to clean and affordable heat, power, and water in their homes and communities, aka quality of life, and oversees Elevate's policy team and works with partner organizations to improve the policy playing field through legislation, regulatory, and executive actions. And then we have the world-renowned Mark Cresswit from ACEEE, and also just had a new baby, I should say. Very lovely, cute new baby. And he will talk about 5 strategic policy levers for an equitable transition. Mark is the Senior Policy Director for the American Council on an Energy Efficient Economy, or ACEEE. In that role, he supports the success of members of ACEEE's policy team and their partners shaping decisions at the local, state, and utility and federal levels across every part of the economy as they accelerate ambition for improving energy efficiency and centering those most historically overburdened and underserved in our communities. Prior to joining ACEEE, Mark managed federal and international policy for RMI's carbon-free buildings program, and led clean energy campaigns with the Sierra Club for nearly 15 years. So we're going to take a look at these great folks and their presentations. And Dana, I think you are up first.
I am up first. Thank you so much, Ruth, for just the introduction and organizing us. And I think like the brilliance of the steering committee and the folks who brought us together for this conversation. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about the benefits of a building decarbonation initiative, the work that we are all doing around the country. And I really wanted to start the conversation with us just defining and what an environment means and what conditions people live in their environments. And I think that the environmental justice movement did a lot of great work to expand how we define an environment, how we think about it. The goal was like to really be intentional and have us talk about environment as the place where people live, where people work, where people play, where people pray. And when we think about that definition, all of those environments are indoors. And it aligns very much with an EPA stat that says 90% of that we spend 90% of our time indoors. And so that means living in a healthy home, working in a healthy environment, having our children play in healthy environments is radically important. And so for us, when we think about a healthy home, it really is a place that is marked as being free from health and safety threats. And so when we think about, criteria pollutants, when we think about carbon emissions, then it becomes really important that we do the work of ensuring that our building sector is as healthy and as vibrant and as free from pollutants as possible. We need to do the work, and you all are doing the amazing work to reduce our cumulative exposure to pollutants from the indoor and outdoor environment. And when we think about, the work that we do to collectively to support frontline groups, the zip codes that are reflected in the meeting that has been planned, like there has been thought about cities and states and regions and being sure that we are working to collectively move forward policy agendas, leveraging investment strategies that address some of the inequity that we see related to where people live because of redlining and other issues. And so if we could go to the next slide, I just wanted us to be clear about what environment entails. So when you look at some of my statistics, they are, New York based, and I know that we are all coming from around the country. But when we think about emissions, we do know, that 30% of final global energy consumption comes from the building sector. 27% of total emissions related to energy come from the building sector, and 19% of indirect emissions from electricity and how we heat the spaces that we are in. There are indirect emissions associated with that. And so in just uplifting some of what we see in New York, the impact of that is that we have 2,000 premature deaths each year in our state. In our city, 10% of our population has asthma. 18% of that asthma is attributed to the appliances that we have in our homes. And living in that kind of environment increases a child's exposure or propensity for developing respiratory illnesses. And so, again, like this idea of us really needing to focus on the live part of how we define environment is critically important if we are going to improve the health and welfare of all Americans. Next slide, please. All right. So when we think about the health harms associated with living in a toxic environment, we know that carbon monoxide exposure is present and can be quite deadly. It exacerbates cardiovascular illnesses, especially in people that are considered to be a part of a vulnerable population. So people who have heart disease and other cardiovascular illnesses. We know that nitrogen dioxide can be damaging to our respiratory system and again has that link to asthma. Burning energy sources like gas and biomass increases our exposure to particulate matter, PM 2.5, and other related health impacts. And when we live in homes that are older, that are poorly ventilated, that have mold, lead, and other toxins, we know that low income people and people of color are likely to live within those conditions. And so, in thinking about how we plan this event, plan this summit, I do know there was a great deal of intentionality on ensuring that we had people in the space who worked in these communities that are described here and with populations of people who have the risk that is noted. If we can go to the next slide. Thanks. So some of the additional inequities that we see related to the building sector are the national average energy burden for low income households is 8.6. That's 3 times higher than for low income households. And depending on where you live, your energy burden could be as high as 30% of your income. And we know that that oftentimes makes energy one of the highest expenses after rent for families. We know that minority populations suffer higher rates of energy cost burden than non-Hispanic whites in the US, and that Black families suffer the highest rates of energy insecurity amongst all income levels. And again, being energy insecure has physical, mental, even economic impacts on families, making, again, the work that we do to decarbonize the building sector all that more important. 80 million Americans in this country are uninsured or underinsured. They are oftentimes living in public housing. And when we think about the health impacts and the financial impacts of living in toxic, in unhealthy, unsafe environments, then we must consider the financial impacts that will have on a family, but also like on our nation, on our resources. And the final additional inequity is that a greener grid is oftentimes found in a wealthier neighborhood just because of the ability to really engage in the energy efficiency space. And we have this wonderful, unique opportunity with the Inflation Reduction Act to bring some parity. And I know that is a part of the planning and the conversations that we'll be having for those 2.5 days in Baltimore. Next slide, please. Oh, I wanted to skip this one. Can we go to the next one? Thank you. And then finally, I'll just end with 3 benefits. We know that electrification can resolve some of the widespread issues like that we see, like insufficient heating, mold growth, leaks, and that it really can create a healthy, energy efficient, hazardous free home, that we can reduce the risk of some of the health impacts that we see. When we do the work to transition entire buildings, we will be improving indoor air quality, and that will also have some external benefits when we think about the venting of indoor air outside. We know that that creates cumulative exposure to pollution. So we have an opportunity to bring some benefits there. And as will be talked about, when we look at some of the programs in the Inflation Reduction Act and how we can leverage retrofitting, there are some real health and energy and economic benefits that we think can come to our communities, and especially if we work in concert with one another to bring them to life. And so, thank you so much.
There we go.
So Anne, I think, thank you, Dana. That was wonderful. Anne, I think this is yours.
Great. Hey, everybody. Really great to see you. I'm Anne McKibben. I'm with Elevate. Thank you so much for inviting me on this webinar today, Ruth Ann and everybody. I really appreciate it. And I cannot wait to see y'all in person in Baltimore. That's just going to be great. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about sort of a retrofit 101. Elevate is an organization that most of our staff spends their time like actually working in buildings and working with contractors and trying to help building owners, particularly in affordable housing and in environmental justice communities, to improve their buildings and to ultimately fully decarbonize them. So I'll talk a little bit about that process. I may be uniquely qualified to give you the only 10-minute version of this because I don't actually work in buildings myself. I'm a policy person, but we'll at least make sure everybody's got the same baseline. Some of you on the call may have spent some time in buildings working on this yourself, so forgive me in advance. We had a little cartoon. It's not possible to hear it, so I'll just talk through what was in the cartoon, but at least we'll look at the nice graphics we've got here. You'll miss my colleague Jose's sonorous narration, so building decarbonization, the basics of what it is. Really, when we work with a building owner to try to decarbonize their building, we're doing three things. We're helping the building owner improve and optimize the efficiency of their building so it uses as little energy as possible to serve its function, to keep people really comfortable. So that's energy efficiency. So that can be insulation and air sealing usually. Sometimes there's some other measures that are needed, but those are really the super important things are in the building shell, so in the walls. Great. Thank you, Mark, for putting the link to the cartoon in the chat. I really appreciate that. So first up, energy efficiency. We want that building to be tight, to be ventilated really well, and in an energy efficient manner, and to be just a really comfortable building to be in. Then we update all the HVAC equipment and the water heaters and the stoves. What we're trying to do is we're trying to take out the fossil fuel burning equipment, replace it with electric equipment. So that prevents any of the fossil fuel equipment from off-gassing into the living space or having those gases be vented to the outside. It prevents your greenhouse gas emissions. Increasingly, as our electric grid is cleaner and cleaner, we're getting closer and closer to having our buildings run essentially completely by renewable energy. So building decarbonization. First, you make the building efficient. Second, you replace all those old fossil fuel burning appliances and equipment with electric appliances and equipment. This is also really good for your indoor air quality because you don't have, our folks constantly go into buildings where there are gas-fired the areas where we work that tend to be gas fired, but they could be oil fired appliances that have got venting to the outside, but the venting's broken. And if you've got electric appliances, you're not going to have to worry about those flue gases coming back into the living space. So really, really great for indoor air quality. So after you've done the efficiency and you've electrified all of your equipment, ideally, if it's possible, it's best to add renewables to the building if you can. And that can help really, first off, just to green the grid electricity that's everybody's using. But it also really helps in a lot of the places that we work. It really helps bring down the total cost of the project, even though you're spending more for solar panels because they're making such cheap energy. Over time, it really makes the project pencil out, which is really great. So we try to do all three of those things in our building decarbonization projects. And if you could go to the next slide. Oops, no, now it wants to run. There we go. Thank you. So when we work with the building owner to go through this whole process, there's a bunch of different steps, and I'll talk about each step just really quickly. And I want to talk about each of these steps just because, you know, when you're putting together this kind of project, there's a lot of people who have to come together and a lot of organizing that has to be done so that things happen in the right order. And also it helps to convince the building owner to do something that frankly is expensive and kind of a hassle. But when done properly, it can be really, really valuable to the building owner and the building tenants as well, if it's a rental building. So the first step, of course, origination, and that is finding a building who might be interested and finding out what their current situation is. So we do an assessment of the building to understand its current energy use, how much greenhouse gases it's currently producing, and also to find out if the building or the building owner or the tenants would be eligible for any sort of resources or programs that would be available to help them make the changes to the building that need to be made. So the first step is a site assessment, and that can also be really helpful in along with the next step in working with the building owner to decide if they want to move forward at all on this project. The second step is project scoping and design, and that's where you look at, you know, in the first step, we're looking at what the building is, and in the second step, we're looking at what the building could be. You're looking at the different kinds of equipment you could have instead of the equipment that is currently there. You're looking at how much savings you'll get off of changes to that equipment and understanding the cost of achieving those savings, and also looking at what incentives are available for the building owner to help them cover the cost of the project. Third step, after you've figured out what your savings are going to be and what the project's going to cost and what kind of incentives are available, there might be a gap there. And that's where folks need financing. This is usually where a technical assistance provider like ourselves, where we might help a building owner with those first two pieces. This is usually where we can maybe direct them to a financing provider. Often the technical assistance providers don't also provide finance, but they can often help folks find, like, hook up with the right bank, for example, who makes these kinds of loans if that's what they need. Next step, when you've got money in hand, you know what the project's going to cost, and you're ready to move forward, is finding a good contractor. Finding a contractor, perhaps you've got, if it's a big building, they need to put out RFP and get multiple bids from various contractors. You might want to talk through with the building owner, like, what are you looking for in a contractor? Not only do you want quality and a reasonable price, but you may want somebody who hires from the local community, for example. So you need to think through those things as you put out an RFP. And then the building owner may also need help assessing the bids that they get back and comparing them to see, you know, sort of what's apples to apples and who's the best deal. Then finally, you get to the point of actually doing the work in the building, construction, and working with the building owner to make, and the contractors to make sure that the construction is handled in such a way that it's convenient for the people who live there. And it's not like making everybody's life really hard and making their home unlivable for a little while. So you have to be really careful about how construction is not only done, but how it's scheduled. That can include, for an organization like ours, who's helping the building owner through this process, that can include a lot of site visits to make sure that construction is going well. And then finally, once everything's done, you want to confirm that the right equipment was installed, that it's all working like it's supposed to be. This can usually take multiple trips back to the building because there's always something that has to be kind of adjusted. And then you want to get whatever documentation you need to make sure that you get all your incentives, all your tax credits, all the things that the building owner might be able to receive to help pay for the project. So there you go. Retrofit 101 in a big multifamily building. This can take over a year. Totally worth it. And it's good work. So
There is not a test at the end of this, everybody, just a little bit of a primer, and then we'll look forward to your questions at the end of this. But Mark, why don't you take it away? And then we'll open it up in case anybody has questions on anything we've heard before we get to logistics about the conference or anything else.
And let me just echo Ann and Dana and Ruth Ann of how excited I am to see you all in 2 weeks. For me, there's a little bit of nostalgia here. I've been working on some of these issues for the better part of a decade. But about 3.5 years ago, had the privilege of participating in what I'll term the predecessor to this convening, organized by Emerald Cities, which was an equitable building electrification convening as well. I've put the report on that convening into the chat if folks want to kind of see some of the background and give another sense of kind of where some of these issues have been bubbling up for a while. But so much has changed in that time period since that meeting 3.5 years ago. There's so much more momentum, understanding, excitement to really deliver the benefits that Dana described through the kind of retrofit programs that Ann laid out. But what I'm going to spend about 10 to 15 minutes on here is the broader policy implications, the kind of broader policy landscape that we need to be thinking about as we go forward to kind of plan an equitable transition here. For me, this really came to the fore a number of years ago when I really understood some of the concepts I'm going to explain right now. So if you can advance the slide, it's a animation here, so not the full slide. There you go. Stop there for a moment. When we actually start transitioning off fossil fuels, right? So the Maryland Office of People's Counsel last year took a look at what does it take to actually meet the state of Maryland's climate policy goals when it comes to decarbonizing buildings, right? What does it take to really reach a clean energy future by 2050? What they found is that the most cost-effective path was to essentially stop selling gas appliances by 2025. And that's what you see here, right? That essentially the entire market shifts very rapidly to selling clean, efficient electric appliances, heat pumps going forward. If you go to the next animation, what that meant was a very gradual, even though you stop selling gas appliances right away, because of the lifetime of equipment, you see a very gradual ramp down in pollution and sales of fossil fuels, of gas, right? All the way through 2050. Essentially, over that time, you eliminate the sale of fossil fuels. But the most important, the last animation here, is that as this happens, you can advance the slide to the next, there we go. The price of gas, because there are fewer and fewer customers connected to the gas system, still paying for the gas infrastructure that exists today, and that still exists and needs to serve those remaining customers, the price of gas triples over the course of the next decade and increases 7 to 10 times, 7 to 10-fold increase by 2050. For those customers that remain on the gas system, the price of gas increases dramatically in a fairly short time here. And what we realized very early on is that cannot fall on those who are already energy burdened in our communities, as Dana described, those who are faced with utility shutoffs and evictions, right? This transition has to be equitable for low-income households. It's got to start there. They need to be the first ones off the system, and we need to plan for an equitable transition here, or we can exacerbate things like the affordable housing crises and energy burden crises that we face in our communities. So to think about this, if you go to the next slide, we've bucketed kind of the complementary policy levers in 5 areas. And the reason we're talking on this webinar in advance is we're going to have a workshop at the retreat where we're going to have the chance to break out in these 5 areas. And you're going to pick one of those areas that you want to prioritize, that you want to focus on during that breakout. So I'm going to describe each of these 5 buckets and kind of the overarching landscape to help folks start thinking ahead to the retreat and which one of these areas you want to prioritize and you want to break out in. You go to the next slide. So as we think about how to make this an equitable transition, again, it needs to start with low-income households. So right now there are 26 million households earning less than 80% of their area median income. So low-income households that are burning health-damaging fossil fuels, as Dana described, inside their home right now. 26 million across the United States. The average cost of a comprehensive retrofit, as Ann described, health and safety repairs, efficiency, electrification together, is in the range of $25,000 to $35,000. What I have here is a whole set of measures that HUD itself, Housing and Urban Development Federal Agency, when they were planning their green and resilient retrofit program, were looking at. Again, there you see the total cost of improvements across health and safety repairs, efficiency, electrification, resilience is $25,000 to $35,000. So 26 million households needing that level of resources is about $800 billion that we need to mobilize for retrofits in the course of the next decade to make sure that low-income households are the first off the system, right? So that's the scale of resources that we need to fund low-income retrofits. So one of those workshop breakouts is going to focus on where do we get all that money? What are all the different federal, state, utility, local sources of funding that can be leveraged into funding a comprehensive retrofit program, as Ann described? You go to the next slide. So that's one breakout. A second breakout is thinking about what is the transition for the gas system. One of the benefits, one of the most cost-effective ways to phase out the gas system to ensure that both those who benefit aren't seeing any increase in energy burden, but also those who aren't participating, those who are still stuck on that gas system, aren't paying those 3 times, 7 times, 10 times increase in gas costs, is to do strategic electrification, to take an entire neighborhood and take it off the gas system so that you don't need to keep investing in repairing and replacing the gas pipes that serve that area. It's called HEAT in Massachusetts. I know saw Green Roots from Chelsea, Massachusetts here, really understands this concept well. Trimming the tree, or kind of starting from the most expensive places in the gas system to prioritize and target for taking those places off the gas system through strategic targeted electrification. Right, so that's another breakout that we're going to talk about. If you go to the next slide, I'll get into a few specifics about what that breakout could focus on. So that starts with stop making the problem worse, right? Stop subsidies for fossil fuels, end the incentives that exist from gas utilities to hook up to the grid. Right now, they subsidize new hookups, end incentives for fossil fuel appliances in the name of energy efficiency. We're really focused on just stop making the problem worse, stop digging the hole deeper. Then move to what we talked about at the beginning, stopping the sale of fossil fueled appliances, having all electric new construction where it's cheaper to build all electric and not connect to the gas system today, but also start moving forward with health-based standards for fossil fuel appliances at the local and the state level. Today, super exciting, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District is voting on the first health-based standard for fossil fuel appliances in the country. Super exciting moment. How to expand that to other jurisdictions to the federal level is something else we can talk about in this breakout. Or again, starting a managed transition, how to ensure that any proposed investment in the gas system includes a non-pipes alternative analysis to look at strategic electrification and actually start launching programs to, again, go neighborhood by neighborhood to move us off the gas system. All right, so that's another breakout. Third one up, if you go to the next slide, is recognizing that in this transition, there are still some places in the country for right now where the cost of operating a heat pump is higher than the cost of operating a gas furnace. That's changing very quickly, but we recognize there are some places where it happens. So we've got to make sure when somebody's moving off the gas system, when they're getting a comprehensive retrofit, that their energy costs do not go up, right? Energy bills for low-income households have to go down when they're transitioning off the gas system. So that looks at things like how to ensure that we have percentage of income payment programs, that we've got limits on energy burden, that we have really robust energy efficiency programs. Those are the kind of programs that we need on the consumer side to ensure that energy bills go down for all low-income households. We also have to ensure that housing costs don't go up. So you can imagine a scenario where a landlord says, okay, I'm going to invest that $25,000, $30,000 into a multifamily unit, but then I'm going to turn around, kick the low-income tenant out, and sell it at a market rate or rent it at a market rate level. We can't have that. So if somebody's going to be taking advantage of state incentives, of federal incentives, utility incentives, we should have affordability covenants that make sure that there aren't displacement, gentrification, evictions as a result of somebody moving forward with a retrofit. So those are the kinds of things on the consumer tenant side that we can look at how to ensure that, again, energy costs go down, housing costs don't go up. That's another breakout, is just tenant and consumer protections. We'll have the Virginia Poverty Law Center will be talking about the fantastic Virginia Percentage of Income Payment Program that's linked to participation in energy efficiency during that breakout. All right, next up. Those are 3 breakouts. The 4th breakout is going to be on resilience. If we can go to the next slide. All right. Just before we get to that next slide on resilience, just some examples of those affordability covenants that I mentioned. They exist in California, in Maryland, where we're going to be, in Massachusetts. We have great examples. Where you just moved off the PowerPoint slide. There we go. All right, next slide. Resilience. So, can we go to the next slide? There we go. Perfect. So one of the things that low-income households are facing is not just the risk of escalating energy prices, it's the risk of these extreme weather events that are being exacerbated by climate disruption, right? So whether it's wildfire risk, where we're seeing now more than 20 million properties in the United States that have a moderate risk of being impacted by wildfires, similar size numbers are at risk of experiencing substantial flood damage. Again, particularly for those who are most overburdened, underserved, communities that have been historically disinvested in, or lower income households that are in the path of these increasingly intense storms, who don't have flood insurance, for instance. Groups like McKinsey have taken a look and found that, just to give you a sense of kind of the loan loss rate during the Great Recession, right, back in 2008, 2009, the loan loss rate for housing in the country reached a level of about 2.5% to 3%, right? So about 2.5% to 3% of all loans, mortgages were lost. When McKinsey looked at the impact of flooding in southern Florida, they found that just the impact of flooding alone could see housing loss in that same level, right? That we're seeing that level of 2.5% to 3%. If there was a recession as well, a financial downturn, that rate could triple to more than 7.5%. To give you a sense of that, just threatens the entire foundation of affordable housing and equitable housing policy in this country, right? So we have to prepare for these extreme weather events so that the investments we're making in low-income households are preparing them to withstand this intense and to prepare the entire financial community in our housing communities to withstand this intense pressure. So if we go to the next slide, one of the ways to prepare is to make sure that we are ensuring resilient investments, that we're ensuring community resilience, things like community resilience hubs, where you've got solar and storage, place to plug in your battery, plug in your phone, get clean water in your community, right? Those are the kind of resilience investments that we can talk about how to bake into this transition. So this final slide, so that's a 4th breakout. The 5th breakout is on economic inclusion. How do we make sure that this transition builds economic wealth, builds community wealth in those communities that have been most historically underserved, right? This is an entire interlaced web of ensuring that communities are represented in this process, that they are leading this transition, that there are jobs created in historically underserved communities, that those jobs are both created for workers and families and households in these communities, and that they're seeing those investments in those communities. That's all part of this community wealth building process. It also makes sure that those jobs that are being created in this transition are family supporting, that they're represented by unions, that they have good jobs, right? It requires us to build apprenticeship programs, pathways to those jobs, doing workforce development in a different way than we have in the past, right? There's a whole series of different wealth building processes to ensure that, again, the communities that have been most historically redlined, disinvested, underserved are benefiting the most in this transition. So those are the 5 buckets, if we go to the final slide here on my side, that we're going to be breaking out and to make sure that this transition is equitable. And again, you're going to get the opportunity to pick which one of those you want to focus on for your community first. It's not to say all of them are important. We've got to be working across all those to ensure that the retrofit programs that we're launching are happening in a in policy environment that really, again, centers the needs of those who are most overburdened, underserved, reaches all low-income households, builds wealth in this process, and creates a more just, resilient economy going forward. So you're going to get a chance to pick one of those breakouts to focus on. Come prepared. Just really appreciate and excited to work with you all over the course of the next couple of weeks and going forward. Thanks all.
A wonderful, thank you, Mark. Hey, we got a great question, by the way, that I thought we might want to just discuss and ask the panelists here. But Charles Lanier wrote, how does outreach and education engagement for low-income people take place in the electrification process? How is this transition going to take place for low-income people? And Charles, I appreciate your question. And I know that we have a great focus at GHHI to look at both the enormous health benefits that are coming from this, but there are cultural issues that we have in our communities around people using gas as their safety net when their electric has gone out that we have to address. But more importantly, to ensure that there aren't additional economic burdens happening, and that we are doing the studies to look at that. Elevate has done a wonderful study showing actually economic benefits to that. But Dana, I wanted to start with you, maybe ask Ann and Mark how you might inform Charles' question.
Let me first.
And
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruth. Let me first say that in cities like Philadelphia, where the housing stock is so old and deteriorated in many low-income areas, and the education process, the outreach, the engagement in terms of making this transition, to me, is huge. And to bring people into the electrification process so that they understand the benefits of it, and not only understand the benefits, but able to take advantage of everything you just talked about, the funding and the services and so forth. I mean, this is something that we really need to tackle and have a real solid plan in terms of convincing people about the affordability of electrification. Because in the long run, if we don't do this, as Mark pointed out, I think Mark pointed out, in 2050, people are going to see very high gas bills because they didn't move with the transition.
Right, the isolation, the market isolation there for sure. Charles, who are you with?
I'm sorry, Philadelphia. From Philadelphia, and I'm director of the Hunting Park Community Revitalization Corporation Neighborhood Advisory Committee. We are a nonprofit community-based organization. And I do have some ideas about how community-based organizations can play a huge role with the outreach, education, engagement of the communities. But there has to be support for that.
Now, we look forward to you sharing that more in a couple of weeks. But Dana, I know you're lit up there to respond in part to Charles's comments here.
Yeah, so I think, Charles, there are a couple of things that we're doing. So I will preface this by saying, like, my work at WeAct is solely on the federal level. And I really hold it as like we unlock the opportunity that our colleagues, locally, and then we convene some EJ groups that they get to carry forward. So two of the things that we are doing is our colleagues in New York City did a demonstration project that transitioned gas stoves out of some public and affordable housing units, measured the air quality, and produced a study that had some recommendations in it, some federal recommendations. So our piece of that work has really been to take that to HUD, we taken it to HHS, we taken it to Senate committees, and bringing along with it the EPA, stories of what people are experiencing on the ground, so that we are marrying the qualitative and the quantitative in trying to push for policy changes at the federal level. our teams on the ground, to your point, have have their tentacles out. They are the pulse of the community. So we do have healthy home work groups that we are using to organize people around the what's next in this particular body of work. And then I will say the final thing that we are doing under the context of like the Justice 40 initiative is we have been going to communities around the country, asking federal officials to join us in meeting with state officials, city officials, and community groups for folks to talk about like what their living conditions are like. And the goal is twofold. One, we want local folks to hear from the feds about like what resources are available to communities and not get in the way of like repurposing them, redirecting them, any of those things. And we try to uplift it as a shovel-worthy project. So like really getting people to like drill down on EPA, DOE, HHS, HUD. These folks have said they have resources available in this way that can address this particular issue that you're solving. In every city we've been to so far, housing has been one of them. And so we are trying to resource groups to, continue that work and have comms attached to it and other things. So that's our small contribution to the larger issue, but I don't know if that was helpful.
Thank you, Dana. And I also want to lift up Crystal's question in the chat about the transition in terms of how that can also ensure energy democracy in that transition. And I think we can take that back, Crystal. We see it, and maybe it makes the most sense in the economic inclusion breakout, or we can talk about creating another one. So that might be the best breakout to choose if energy democracy and kind of that is the part of the transition that you want to focus on, if that makes sense to others on the call. Just an idea. We'll follow up for sure on that one.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Mark, for that. I had pinged Claudia also to say where we thought that might fit. But one of the important things to do, if you have not done it, is please fill out the survey. Claudia put that in the chat, and it just takes about 5 minutes, and I'll buy you a nice drink or feed you some good food in Baltimore in exchange for doing that. And it may not be all the good Philly food you're going to bring down, Charles, but it'll be good Baltimore food. But anyhow, if you do that, that'll also help us in these questions. I didn't know if we have other questions, if anybody has other questions, and if not, if I don't see any hands up, I would ask Becca, I know there's a slide on logistics, if you want to put it up and just make sure everybody's clear on logistics. You want to take it?
Yeah, can you see?
We can indeed. Thank you. Why don't you take it from here?
Perfect. Okay, so as you guys hopefully can read, today my biggest concern is actually today the hotel reservation site closes. So if you have not booked a room, please do so as soon as we get off of this webinar. That would be wonderful. You will receive another email from me regarding that. Additionally, if you have not let us know if you are going to attend the site visit, can you please also shoot me an email? I will probably send you all a follow-up email asking you that. Just reply back to that email. Let me know. We are booking transportation in accordance with the number that are attending. If there are any questions, you can feel free to drop them in the chat. We will have all information will be sent to you via email before you arrive, so you'll know where to go, what time to do it, and all of that good stuff. We'll have agendas printed for you. You'll receive them when you check in. The meetings that are taking place at the Center for History and Culture, it's about a 2-minute walk from the hotel, very easy, no one should get lost, but we will staff the route just to make sure that that does not happen. And again, you'll have a detailed agenda when you check into the hotel. If not, you will receive it when you show up for the meetings. If you are someone who is just coming in for the day or both days, please reach out to me so we can talk about parking, let you know the best place to park and how to get to the meetings in ample time. Does anyone have any questions?
There is a question from Evie, and Evie, we will send to you sorry, there's a gnat in my office. We will send you the site visit location. And you can certainly meet us at the site visit, but please join us if you want later that evening at the hotel. We're going to do a really light cocktail and hors d'oeuvre reception for those who are in town on Monday night. We're going to kick off the site visit at 2:00 sharp on Monday. But we can certainly send that to you, and Becca, if you'll please just take note of that for those who are local and not staying.
Yep, perfect. I'll include that information in the emails that we send out with all the other reminders. So everyone has a full slate of what to expect.
All right. Any other questions? I want to thank our presenters today. Thank you, Dana and Ann and Mark. Thank you, Claudia, for all your great work. Becca, for your great work on the logistics side of this. We look forward to seeing you in Baltimore. Contact us, reach out, and we'll see you soon. And Crystal will make
I got
sure.
a small question.
Yes, Stephen.
Oh,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
I had asked this in writing. I hadn't seen the response.
Oh, sorry.
Will Tuesdays breakout and/or small groups be an occasion for doing a drill down on topics presented in the panel?
Yes.
Or are the subjects of those breakouts and
Yeah.
small group workshops already determined?
We've got Claudia or Mark or Dana. Anybody want to answer that? But Claudia, you might be the best on that.
Sure, no problem. Hi, I am really looking forward to meeting you guys all in just a few weeks. So the breakouts right now, right after your panel, Stephen, we have a workshop on outreach and coalition building campaigns, and we're going to build off of the lessons learned from the case study shared in the panel to inform that workshop. So it wouldn't be just about the case study that you presented, but also about the other ones that were presented alongside yours in the panel. Happy to follow up with you offline if you'd like to discuss specific questions that you'd like included in the workshop following your panel.
Okay.
All right, sounds great. And did I miss any other questions? Claudia, help me out here. I hope not. All right.
I don't see any others that were unanswered, but feel free to unmute yourselves if you did have another question.
All right. Well, I'm hoping we're going to have good weather. Yep. Charles, is that your hand up? Or are you saying goodbye? I think he was saying goodbye. All right, everybody.
No, that's my hand up. I'm sorry.
Oh, your hand up. Okay, speak up.
The breakouts, will that rotate? Because there's a couple of sessions that I might want to try to attend two or three of them if possible. I don't know how is that.
Yes. So some of the breakout sessions will be identical questions no matter which breakout you're in. For the ones that were described today, you will unfortunately only be able to attend one. So we suggest perhaps coordinating with the other representative attending from your organization so you can both attend different ones. We'll also have opportunities to report out on each of the outcomes of those discussions, including with posters around the room and opportunities for share out. So that way you have time to learn about the conversations that happened in other rooms. We just had so much information that we wanted to cover in a short amount of time. So we ended up deciding to have some breakouts that were, different topics for each group. Hope that answered your question.
And if there are things from the work you're doing in all of your locations, I know we have about a third of the people that we're going to see next week on today, but if you have things you want to bring and share, there'll be opportunities to network as well and share those and get other people involved in supporting what you're doing. So we have 3 new messages. You guys love us this afternoon. Okay, there you go. Do you consider Maryland as the mid-Atlantic in our regional breakouts? We do, Evie. Indeed. All right. I know we're technically the South, but we claim the mid-Atlantic. We're south of that Mason-Dixon line, but we claim the mid-Atlantic there. All right. And I think we are it, and we will see you next week. Please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.